Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the biggest environmental promises on the planet, India's goal to hit net zero emissions by 2070. I mean, this is a massive, nation-defining transformation, so let's get right into it.
Okay, so the promise is huge, right? But what's actually happening on the ground today? If you peel back the layers of headlines and official statements, how can you really tell if things are moving in the right direction? That's exactly the question we're going to tackle. And to get to the bottom of this, we're going to do a little detective work. We're going to follow two key evidence trails. First up, we'll follow the money, see where the cash is really flowing. Then we're going to follow the carbon and check out the accountability piece. Put those two together, and we should have a much clearer picture of what's what.
So, our first trail, it all starts with the money. It's simple, really. If you want to know what parts of India's green transition are getting real priority, you just have to look at where the public investment is headed. And whoa, when you look at the data, it is crystal clear. Public money is flooding into solar and wind. They are the absolute heavyweights here, no question. Hydropower, it's getting a decent chunk, but then you look over at biomass and geothermal, and they're barely getting a slice of the pie. It's not an even spread at all. But that's not even the whole story. See, it's not just about the amount of money. It's about how stable that funding is. And this brings us to a really important idea: investment volatility. Think of it like this. High volatility is like flying through a bad storm. The funding goes up, it goes down, it's all over the place. And that makes it almost impossible to plan for the future. And this is where that money trail gets really interesting. The research shows this stark divide. Solar and hydropower, their funding is pretty stable, kind of like smooth flying. But then you have wind, biomass, and geothermal on the other side. Their investments are way more turbulent and risky. They're on this bumpy, unpredictable ride, which is a huge problem for technologies we need.
And look, this isn't just our take. A recent analysis says it flat out. The predictability for solar and hydro is just higher, while wind, biomass, and geothermal are way more exposed to these wild swings. For policymakers, that volatility is a major red flag. So that's what the money's telling us. But what about the emissions? For that, we need to pick up our second trail.
All right, we followed the money. Now it's time to follow the carbon. To get the other half of the story, we've got to look at what India's most powerful energy companies are actually telling us, or not telling us, about their own carbon footprint.
Now, emissions accounting can sound super complicated, but let's break it down. It really comes down to 3 levels, or scopes. Scope 1, that's easy. It's the pollution coming right out of your own factory's chimney. Scope 2 is the emissions from the electricity you buy to power that factory. And then there's Scope 3. Scope 3 is, well, it's pretty much everything else. It's your entire supply chain, from start to finish.
And here's the kicker. For the energy sector, Scope 3 is the elephant in the room. It is by far the biggest chunk of a company's carbon footprint. One paper actually calls it the preeminent influencing factor. So you absolutely cannot get to net zero without getting a handle on Scope 3. The question is, are companies even tracking it? Well, the data shows what you could call a massive accountability gap. There are 15 different categories for Scope 3 emissions. And it turns out most big energy companies in India are only reporting on a couple of them, if that. Some of the largest players are reporting on 0 categories. We're talking about flying almost completely blind on the single biggest source of emissions. Okay, so we have followed the money and found a lot of volatility. We followed the carbon and found a huge reporting gap. Now, this is the moment where we bring those two trails together to see the whole picture.
The research really boils it down to this simple but powerful idea. Think of it like a formula. On one side, you've got all the good stuff. Building more solar plants and wind farms, that's your green assets, and they save future emissions. But all that progress is getting dragged down or maybe even canceled out by this huge invisible anchor of unreported Scope 3 emissions. And the research spells it out. This is a two-front war. You have to augment investments in renewable resources while simultaneously decreasing Scope 3 emissions. You can't just do one or the other. True progress means doing both at the same time.
You can see this whole dynamic playing out with the industry giants. I mean, look at these numbers. Companies like Adani, Reliance, NTPC, their plans for new renewable energy are just staggering. We're talking hundreds of thousands of megawatts. They have this incredible potential to move the needle. But, and it's a huge but, that potential only matters if they also get real about tracking and cutting their entire carbon footprint, especially that hidden giant, Scope 3. So after connecting the money trail and the carbon trail, what's the actual path forward? How does India take this ambitious 2070 promise and turn it into a reality? After sifting through all the data, all the investments, all the reporting gaps, the solution isn't some crazy 100-point plan. It actually boils down to two critical actions. Just two. First, you've got to stabilize the money. We need clear, long-term policies that calm down that investment turbulence for key technologies like wind and biomass. That will unlock their true potential. And second, enforce transparency. That accountability gap has to be slammed shut. That means making it mandatory for companies to report their emissions in a clear, standardized way, especially the whole shebang, Scope 3. And all of this leaves us with one last big question to think about. We always talk about the climate crisis like it's a technology problem, something we can fix with shinier solar panels or bigger wind turbines. But what if this data is telling us a different story? What if the real key to hitting that zero isn't just about technological power, but about the simple, fundamental power of transparency? Something to chew on. Thanks for joining us on The Explainer.